Yep.
Okay. Yeah, should I just get going?
Yeah. Thanks for being here, and the floor is all yours.
Okay, we have a bunch of pros on this call, obviously, so um, I don't know that I'm going to be telling you anything new. And I have a short presentation, and I'll move through it sort of quickly and leave lots of time for Q&A. I'm particularly interested to hear people's questions and perspectives, especially the folks in Israel and some of the other folks that I've maybe not come across before. How's my connection, Benjamin? Is it okay?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm Chris Rauscher, Senior Director of Policy Market Development at Sunrun. Work on the policy team and have one foot in our business development grid services team. I'm sure a lot of folks have heard of Sunrun before. We're the United States' largest residential solar storage home energy management company. We're creeping up on 1 million customers nationwide now. And a stat that always kind of boggled to my mind is that we are the second largest owner of solar assets in the United States. In aggregate, we're bigger than every single utility scale developer except for NextEra by installed capacity. And we do that one little rooftop at a time. I think you folks know what VPPs are generally. At Sunrun, we've got quite a big pipeline of VPPs, both in operation and in development, counting now, over a dozen VPP programs in all sorts of different flavors that we'll walk through. And I think it's really interesting that maybe 5 or so years ago there were lots of fights around net metering and injecting energy to the grid, and more and more we're seeing utilities and regulators recognize the value of our exports through grid service and VPP programs. I won't mention the net billing tariff in California because that is, of course, a recent development that has a lot of nuance to it. Yeah, so before we get to VPPs, I'll just say that Sunrun's sort of main business is providing solar to residential customers and then adding batteries for backup power for those customers. We do other things like partnering with Ford on the all-electric F-150 Lightning, the first mass market electric truck, first mass market bidirectional EV. But our bread and butter is solar and batteries for backup power. So we view grid services as sort of an additional value add customer proposition and for the utility as well. But we don't have customers coming to us saying, hey, give me solar and batteries so I can do grid services. It's more about Sunrun providing that fundamental value to the customer of solar and battery backup, and then doing grid services on the top. So just a couple of interesting stats here about the numbers of backup power hours that we provided in California
You can
last
see your screen, FYI.
Oh, can you see it now?
Oh, wait, I don't see it.
No?
Do others see it?
I can see it. I've been
Okay.
able to see it the whole time.
Never mind.
Okay, and so I flashed California, and here's some interesting stats about Puerto Rico and Hurricane Fiona last year, where we provided 350,000 hours of aggregate backup power over 11 days. Okay, VPP examples. We have a number of different kind of flavors or buckets of VPPs, wholesale market programs, utility bilaterals where we respond to an RFP and win a contract, and then open access programs, which we also sometimes call BYOD programs. In New England and ISO New England, the first jurisdictional wholesale market covering the 6 New England states, we won a first of its kind capacity supply obligation in 2019, where we bid in thousands of home solar and battery systems into the capacity market and successfully secured an obligation. This is capacity only, no energy market participation. New England is unique in this respect that they offer that market pathway. This predates Order 2222, and we went operational with it last summer for the first year. So this is a direct to wholesale market VPP. In California, we have a number of different VPP examples, some sort of wholesale market adjacent programs, but mostly in California, it's bilateral programs with CCAs, community choice aggregation aggregators, as well as regulatorily created programs like ELRP, the Emergency Load Reduction Program, and DSGS, which should be launching for batteries this summer, the Demand Side Grid Support Program. Both ELRP and DSGS are really emergency load programs intended for times of high demand when wholesale market prices go above a certain threshold in the CAISO, and then home batteries and thermostats and other demand response can provide that sort of peaking capacity that the system needs to avoid blackouts. In Puerto Rico, we actually have two different programs now. One is our 17 megawatt VPP contract with PREPA, the utility there. PREPA is the utility that owns the assets, but the system is now being run by LUMA, but our contract is still with PREPA. This is a 7,000 or so home solar plus battery virtual power plant. And I think there are a couple of things that are really interesting about this one. One is that PREPA has the most basic utility operation system and utility grid in the Western Hemisphere. I feel fairly confident in saying that. And they have no DERMS platform, no AMI. Their dispatch for regular generators is just, they just use a piece of paper, and then they pick up the phone and call the operators to get them to fire up a peaker plant. And so if a VPP can work in Puerto Rico, it can work anywhere. And then the second thing that I find really exciting about this VPP is it's for 260 days a year. So that's every weekday, and cycling to absorb solar in the mornings, and then midday and early afternoon, charging the battery with solar power, and then discharging the battery in the late afternoon, early evening. So with this sort of duty cycle and the frequency, it's starting to look much more like, base load power rather than some sort of emergency resource or occasionally used resource. I don't have a slide on it, but we're also negotiating a new program in Puerto Rico with LUMA and the Energy Bureau, an emergency demand response program that should go live later this summer. In Puerto Rico, they're in the fascinating position of knowing their demand curve very well and having no idea about their supply. And so they have generators trip offline a number of times every single week, and that causes them to force rolling blackouts around the island, which is crazy. We're used to having in the United States, we're used to having extra headroom on supply on generation. So this emergency demand response program in Puerto Rico will be open to all aggregators and will be a resource that'll be a fast response resource to step in when a generator looks like it's going to trip offline, or if it has tripped offline. And the stated intent there is to help prevent load shedding events, as they are euphemistically called, otherwise known as blackouts. So I just covered wholesale market VPPs, and then bilateral contract VPPs, and now bring your own device programs, or BYODs. This is the same fundamental structure as the emergency demand response program I just mentioned in Puerto Rico. And we have these programs all throughout the New England states. I think, every single state now, because Maine is launching one as of June 1st in a pilot format. In New England, these BYOD programs, they're mostly known by Connected Solutions, which is a sort of brand name in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island, and I think soon in New Hampshire, as well as Connecticut. These programs track wholesale market capacity and transmission peaks, and dispatch our batteries and other batteries to hit those peaks and reduce the utility's proportional share of those peak costs. In New England, the cost of the system, the capacity market in particular, flows through a single hour coincident peak in the summer, and that's how the costs get divided up. And transmission generally flows through a single coincident, well, 12 CP. So every month, the coincident peak hour. So these programs chase those peaks and help save ratepayers money. One of the reasons that we really like these programs, particularly in New England, is that utilities generally run them through their energy efficiency plans and budgets. The budgets are approved by the regulators at a very high level, and then the utilities have revenue recovery off of the budgets. And these wholesale market costs are a pass-through, so the utilities are neutral on whether or not they reduce those costs. So it's really a great case of aligning incentives where participating customers like ours get grid service revenue, we get grid service revenue, non-participating customers receive savings by reduced wholesale market costs. Utility is neutral on the savings and they get paid to run the programs. We have this style of program in development in Colorado and Arizona, Illinois. DSGS in California is basically the same structure. Hawaii is coming out with 3 different BYOD programs soon, and then the Puerto Rico program as well. So when I kind of step back and take my Sunrun hat off and just think about where I see the future of VPPs going in the US, I think the best sort of near-term future is having this style program in every single state before we get sort of more complex around VPPs. And these programs can, and in the Northeast do, allow for participation, not just by batteries, but by thermostats. That's actually where they started. Single directional electric vehicles, now bidirectional electric vehicles in some cases, water heaters. So it's a really good program structure for unlocking value from demand side resources. So I think that, yeah, that's the end of my presentation. I'll stop there and we can have a dialogue.
Feel free to just unmute yourself and
should we raise the hand or just
Hey Chris, you said Maine is now involved in that. Is that part of the Efficiency Maine Durham's platform that they're rolling out?
Yeah, they
Okay.
yeah. I'm actually, Sunrun doesn't do any business in Maine, and I'm on the board of trustees of Efficiency Maine. So I won't say anything more about the program lest I say something that's actually not public.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's part of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Chris, you said that you would like to see one of these BYOD programs in every state. Are any of the existing trade organizations like working on that, or is that like who is trying to scale that as like a first wave of VPP?
Yeah, really sharp question. I think RMI's VP3 group is probably the best position to do that. AEU, which used to be, AEE, is also kind of sort of working on that. We get local SIA chapters to push as well, but there's no one that's really kind of like taking up the charge on this. But I'm hopeful that VP3 will do it expressly. There's a trade association hole, as you know.
Yeah, that's what I'm still trying to figure out the contours of all of it.
I was gonna say Flex Coalition, which is a newer one, they might take that on at some point.
Yeah, I hope they do.
Yeah, it does seem like an audit of like the existing trade organizations and what everyone is doing and not doing and compared to what needs to be done, like some kind of gap analysis would be helpful.
Yeah.
Quick question regarding, so you mentioned bring your own device. Is that only for batteries, or are you guys planning to also control, you mentioned thermostats and other kind of DERs? And I'm also curious about how do you guys, so if bring your own device, can I plug my Tesla Powerwall to your VPP? And if so, how do you guys control and dispatch and kind of deal with the control layer of Tesla, which I know is, they're not too happy to kind of give access to that, or at least that's kind of what I heard.
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer those questions from a couple of different perspectives. One is that the bring your own device programs, let's just focus on Massachusetts. Those programs currently allow thermostats, EVs, all sorts of different technologies, including batteries. There are different program offerings with different compensation levels. all of those technologies in Massachusetts are running through the Energy Hub platform. Sunrun, we today are enrolling batteries and in some cases, I think just inverters as well, because there's a, I think it's a frequency regulation component of it as well. Tesla's also enroll, and Teslas are enrolled through Sunrun and through other platforms. The programs in Massachusetts and throughout the Northeast, well, I guess I'll just constrain this to Massachusetts. They allow two flavors. One, direct customer device enrollment, where you own your Powerwall and you can enroll in the program, and then aggregator enrollment. So where Sunrun enrolls the customers whose devices we own, and then we manage that on the back end. And then separately, Sunrun, we have a umbrella global grid service agreement with Tesla that provides for our management of Tesla batteries within our VPPs.
How does that work for someone to enroll directly without an aggregator? Like how do they do the control there?
Yeah, you integrate the device generally directly with the DERMS platform, Energy Hub, or in Vermont, Virtual Peaker, and then they dispatch the batteries.
What are the main technological barriers that you see today in order to increase the usability, the scale,
The rollout.
the rollout?
None.
So it's mostly regulation.
100% utility and transigence. 100%. Because like if you look at Puerto Rico, right? So all of these programs that I'm talking about are metered directly at the device level. They're metered at the battery or at the inverter. They don't require utility point of interconnection metering. They don't require AMI or smart meters. There's no baselining because it's all about device performance, not behavioral demand response when it comes to batteries. And so there's really there are no technical barriers, and Puerto Rico proves that case, very clearly. And it's really just about utilities seeing both the resource here and trying to figure out how they can align incentives on their end to run these programs to the benefit of all of their customers and frankly to their bottom line. And so that's really where we see that's where we see the problem. And then there's a ton of misconceptions, almost misinformation out there, where a lot of utilities and regulators think, okay, 2222 came out, so we don't have to do anything at the state level because you have like beautiful, perfect, direct wholesale market access. And Allie knows that that's not true. Like it as of today, 2222 actually didn't open up any new opportunities for residential solar and battery aggregations in any market. And I feel total confidence in saying that. And I don't think it will open up any opportunities in the next, 1 to 3 years or so. And so I think there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding around 2222. And then utilities, you might have folks who work on grid of the future and they think, okay, well, once we have fully deployed AMI for every single customer, then we can start doing these programs. Not really understanding that these programs are not reliant on utility meters. So that sort of like educational hurdle is real, and that's where we're at.
Chris, you spoke to. Go ahead, Francis.
Oh yeah, I was just going to. I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about your experience in EV, specifically in VPP. So, the Ford Lightning, and where you've seen valuable programs that that asset is participating in. And I know like Connected Solutions doesn't allow EVs, I think, at least the latest I've learned. So I'm curious to hear, when you think about bring your own device and how EVs are incorporated or not, and one-way charging versus bidirectional charging. Interested in hearing your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's a really fun topic. Yeah, sort of shifting times of charging. So sometimes called V1G, which not a big fan of, but there's not a ton of value there from our perspective. It's something that obviously should be done, but it's kind of like a base case, not really where the value is. The real value is in V2G, parallel operations, so being able to load follow in the home or export to the grid. I think connected solutions will allow that for this summer. Fermata, I believe, tested it last summer in a pilot manner in Rhode Island, I think. And the F-150 Lightning can offboard power at, I think, 9 kilowatts, which is pretty significant, 9.8 kilowatts or so, which is pretty significant for a home resource, considering that a home might only be consuming 1 or 2 kilowatts. Where we're at with that partnership right now is we've been rolling out the trucks and installing the home integration system for over a year now. Those are all set up in non-parallel operation mode, so purely backup power. So the grid goes down, home integration system isolates the house from the grid, and then the truck can provide power to the grid to keep the lights on. Later this year, we will be providing software updates and doing some other things to unlock parallel operation so that the trucks can operate when the grid is up and do time of use arbitrage or even exporting to the grid, which is where all the value is. This has been a really difficult road with the utilities in terms of interconnection. Like convincing them that phase 1 backup power is not an interconnection is it takes a ton of work, even though it looks just like a standalone generator in that configuration. And then convincing utilities that they don't need to create totally new V2G interconnection pathways for parallel. It just looks like a standalone battery, a stationary battery rather. And that they don't need to create new grid service programs for bidirectional EVs. Just look at your existing grid service programs and consider where a bidirectional EV might present a different use case or require a little bit more nuance or some tweaking. And that's been tricky. Obviously, Green Mountain Power in Vermont is a case where that's been actually super easy. And they're like, oh yeah, this looks like a stationary battery for interconnection, and yeah, we can just put it in the BYOD program and it'll provide the same services as a Tesla Powerwall or an LG Chem. And we really think that's how all utilities should be treating this.
Chris, just following along that same thought, you mentioned bidirectional charging for EV solutions. Have you incorporated any battery buffered solutions as well, like the FreeWire, for example? I know there's others out there.
No, we haven't, but we have seen. We only focus on residential charging, so that's number one. Number two, we can derate the charger if the service connection is not large enough. And obviously, we have to upgrade the service connection in some cases. We can also get into situations where we need to upgrade the main panel or put in SPAN or a similar device to manage the loads, because the charger can go up to 80 amps, which is a significant amount of power. We have seen a number of customers, not a huge proportion, but a number of customers who select the truck, the home integration system, and a standalone and a stationary battery as well, wanting the whole suite. I think that that'll probably be an edge case going forward, but we have seen that, but no sort of no battery buffer.
Quick follow up on that. I'm curious regarding, are you guys operating on the CNI level as well, or are you mainly only focused on residentials?
Yeah, 100% residential. The only place where we get away from single family homes is affordable multifamily, sort of low rise buildings.
Okay, if nobody's asking, I will ask why. Is that kind of part of your business, like overall strategy, or do you see any kind of other reason if not?
Yeah.
Yes. What is the situation in CNI?
Yeah, CNI solar and batteries in the US, every single site is bespoke, custom designed, different sizing, different needs, metered differently. Oftentimes you have a tenant that's not the owner, different interconnection. If you're adding a battery, what are you backing up? Are you backing up common area? Are you backing up other things? If you're providing solar savings, is it a master meter building? Or are there sub meters? Does the owner get the savings? Does the tenant? With residential, it's 5 to 8 kilowatt solar systems. Interconnection's the same. 1 or 2 power walls or LG chems or another battery solution, and so it's much more replicable. And this isn't just the view of Sunrun. This is there should be more C&I solar and battery development in the U.S. But my understanding is that those are the key barriers holding it back.
Thank you.
Chris, so you were talking about Puerto Rico and you said that they have no DERMS, no AMI. But if I put on my utility obstructionist hat, they always say things like distribution, feeder, circuit overload things. Why is that not a problem? And is that just a misinformation thing?
And actually, it's starting to become a problem, not a problem, but hosting capacity is starting to be flagged in Puerto Rico by the utility because the rate of solar adoption is increasing, although it's still in the single, maybe we're at 3% or something like that. It's still pretty low. They are flagging different circuits for potential saturation, but they're doing that with very limited intelligence and information about it. And they're just doing that as a, I think, to be safe. To answer your question, they don't have enough insight into their system to really know where this could be an issue and where it might not be an issue. What they know is happening is they're load shedding many times a week. And so that's kind of the thing right in front of them that they're trying to solve for. They also
have a different pain point than those on the pre-existing grid.
Yeah. And as you know, the hosting capacity concern and all of that stuff, usually I don't know what the percentage is, but they start talking about that when there's tons of headroom left in the system, right? And so I think that's a secondary concern for them right now.
One more question, maybe Ellison can also answer it. So we talked about the supply side, the homes, and regarding the demand side, those utilities, do you have more information about what are their barriers? Maybe it's that tool that can really tell them when they need to buy the energy from the VPP or what's the right price, because eventually, as you put it, they're the ones who are not promoting it more. So what's really stopping them from seeing this great value?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a quirk of utility business model in the United States where it depends on where in the US, because some utilities don't own generation and they're just poles and wires companies, but they're just very slow. They're very slow to turn the ship. And they're also large operational organizations that are primarily focused on keeping the lights on, and they outside of Puerto Rico and some other places, they tend to be very good at that. And this is not really their main focus. I have found that even when you have someone really good at a utility who speaks the language and wants to get these programs over the finish line, it can be difficult to get organizational buy-in. So I really don't think it's a whole lot more complicated than that. It's that their business model and their regulatory structures are not set up for it. And then the people in leadership and then all the way down to the sort of implementing level are not fully bought in.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Is that not true in Israel? What's it like in Israel?
Well, actually here it's the utility is quite a problem because we have one utility at the moment, mostly one producing the energy. Hopefully it will change. So it's a kind of a monopoly, which is never good for new technologies. But we are seeing some ideas in that field. Mostly, by the way, organization trying to aggregate a lot of energy producer into their shop, and then working with that big amount in front of the utilities? Because as you said, the utilities don't want to start to think about many small homes directly and all those challenges. But if one platform can give him on demand, let's say 500 megawatt, yes or no, then maybe that could be a good solution. How do you see that perspective, having those intermediate, combining many homes or utility scales or CNIs, and then they will talk with those big utilities scale?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of getting into like the DERMS software, DERMS platform play, which obviously there's a ton of value and that they play a significant role in the ecosystem. Sunrun has a co-investment in a company named Lunar, which is both a hardware and a software company. The software side is composed of an acquisition of Moixa, which is a British DERMS platform, and that's been renamed GridShare. And what they do is they are similar to an energy hub or a virtual peaker, but they provide even greater level of sophistication of asset management and can get down into the specific site level battery health and optimization. And so Sunrun, they manage, they're our sort of like back-end network operations center for all of our assets, but then they also sell to utilities as a utility platform and manage other companies' assets as well. So there's definitely a role there.
I have two questions, unrelated. One is, have you seen any battery perform better than others? And the other is, how do you see this market going where, right now we've got device manufacturers like Tesla going in, we have solar installers like you, and then independents that are starting to spread up everywhere, like Home Connect and others. Do you see like one of them is going to win, or is it like everybody's going to have a little share of it?
Yeah, and the first question, Sunrun is technology agnostic, so we buy, sell, and install all sorts of different device manufacturers. So I won't talk about like which one is preferred, but I will say that people want Tesla, and Powerwalls are great, and their sort of customer interface, their app is really phenomenal as well. And then in terms of the sort of competitive landscape, we partner with companies like Leap. We work with Home Connect in some cases. We certainly partner on policy with lots of different companies. And I think in the marketplace, there's plenty of room for growth because the need is so great, whether you're talking about California with public safety shutoff events, or Puerto Rico with load shedding, or really anywhere. Even if it's not a reliability concern, but it's just a cost concern, there's just huge demand for DER services, especially as we look at electrification and starting with the transportation sector. Like if we just add all of this new load onto the system and we don't manage it in a smart way, it's going to be really disastrous. So I think there's plenty of room for many different players with different business models. Maybe let's go to Justin, because I think that little percentage thing is handy, although you just kind of look at your percentage the whole time.
Definitely. No, you go, Justin.
I can't hear you, Justin, if you're speaking. Come back to you. Okay.
His mic shut down.
So while Justin figures it out, I'm curious, and I might be kind of completely off here, but I'm curious, you guys are not an energy retailer, right?
No, we have partnerships with some, but no, we're not.
Okay. And do you feel, is that kind of due to this kind of disconnect from the customer, kind of, you're not dealing with their energy kind of prices, or kind of being, do you feel that as an advantage or not? Because I know there are some kind of energy retailers that are trying to do VPPs as well, one way or another. And I'm curious to hear your opinion about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's certainly not a disadvantage. In most places around the US, customers are on default supply if it's a competitive marketplace. And they're generally on flat rate structures. So the role of the retailer is not super significant. And then in places like Texas, we partner with retailers and provide a combined product. I think once you start getting into the retail supply space, I know this works differently in Europe and elsewhere. But in the US, once we've looked at it in the past, and it just starts getting more complicated than the effort is worth, basically, especially because their fundamental value proposition is solar on your roof that you consume in real time or bank credits for future use. And that can be independent of the rate structure that they're on, might be independent.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Excellent, thanks. So yeah, I was curious about making the sale to the utilities, because it seems like there's more that they have to do essentially to enable this all to work in order to support, discharging back into the grid and whatnot. And the main upside, I guess, for the wholesale markets is they've got more to sell. They don't need to build out potentially extra transmission capacity if they can source it more locally, which I think is a really cool upside to all of this. But so they've got some participation and incentives. Is the main selling point to utilities reliability, resilience, or what is their reason for wanting to get involved beyond altruism?
I mean, I do a lot of work in Puerto Rico, and then we've also poked around in the USVI, and there they are experiencing significant reliability issues as well as load defection, particularly in the USVI, where people who can get solar and batteries are, and that shrinks the rate base. And so utilities there are really wanting to engage with the demand side and use it as a resource, have visibility and not necessarily control, but visibility and be able to get the value from the demand side. Elsewhere, I mean, setting aside Holy Cross in Colorado and Green Mountain Power in Vermont, which they may be altruistic and they see the future, I think the rest of the utilities don't want to be seen as laggards, and so maybe maybe a role dipping their toe in the water with these programs to see, to kind of figure out where the future is headed. We haven't really seen big IOUs come out and say we're fully investing in the demand side and we really believe in this stuff. They may say good things at conferences, but then it doesn't get translated down into programs. So it's not, to answer your question more directly, it's largely not a pitch from us to the utilities, almost ever, outside of island situations. It's more us intervening in rate cases, in IRPs, energy efficiency program budget cases, legislature, and trying to use the policy and regulatory world and the political world to force utilities to do the right thing.
Okay, so it is more of the stick than the carrot, and at this point, because economically they need a motivator, otherwise they need the government to tell them what to do, basically.
Yeah, I also think too that because the demand side largely started out as solar, and a lot of the companies that are doing solar are now also doing batteries and EVs and other things, I think utilities have a bit of a prejudice against demand side solutions because they kind of see it as load erosion, or historically they have. And so like if Sunrun is putting in an F-150 Lightning and a solar system on the roof, they may not see that as good for them, even though the F-150 Lightning is probably going to consume more electricity than the solar system can provide over the course of the year. So I think there's a little bit of that too, sort of historical bias.
Right on. Thanks.
If no one else has a question, I have another one. Can you tell us more about the end user side of things? What are the motivations for participating? What's their the general reception, and then what's the user experience in the long run?
Yeah. Yeah. So sort of getting back to an earlier point, generally we don't, the sort of understanding and knowledge about grid services or VPPs on the customer level is generally pretty low. And customers are not sort of, beating down our door to be enrolled in a grid service program. The way that we approach that is through a revenue share with the customer. So, yearly cash card or some other monetary benefit to the customer for the value that their system provided. Well, actually, as an aggregator, we don't break it out per system. Every customer who's enrolled in a program gets the same amount of value, whether or not their system actually performed that way. We take on the risk ourselves. So if a customer has a battery that's having problems and didn't perform for connected solutions, let's say for the summer, they still receive the same amount in a cash card as their neighbor whose battery did perform perfectly, because that's Sunrun's obligation, right? Not the customer's. Yeah, so it's generally the value proposition that we bring to the customers that we're going to seamlessly manage your solar and battery system. And when and if we enroll it in grid services, that'll just be additive value for you, not something that you have to deal with. Obviously, you have early adopters, you have folks who are highly engaged with their Tesla app and other apps, and then the case might be different. And I know that Tesla has a bit of a different viewpoint on this as well, where they like to gamify grid services more. They want sort of more real-time satisfaction to the customer in the app and more insight for the customers that want it.
And yeah, Tesla has this whole they tell you about events in advance and you can opt out and whatnot. Do you do something similar, especially with customers that don't have Teslas?
It depends on the program. Connected solutions, there are certain programs that are scheduled, and then the interaction with the customer is a little bit different. And I would say, I don't know the battery mix offhand, but in many places our predominant battery is Tesla, and so then a lot of the customer interface goes through their app.
A small technical question. How do you solve the problem if at a certain moment the grid needs more energy, but if you use someone's battery, he's not going to have enough energy in his car in the morning? I mean, you don't ask them if it's okay, you just do it, or do you see the battery capacity and then you fill it somewhere else?
Yeah, so we always reserve a minimum state of charge in the battery for backup power. So 20%, 30%. In a place like Puerto Rico, the reserve margin might be higher, and that way you can use the rest of the battery, the headroom, for grid services, and then reserve enough power for a backup event.
And is that up to the customer discretion to decide, or is that something you kind of predetermine?
I don't want to get into the magic, the kind of special sauce too much, but it depends on different device manufacturers.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Chris, actually on that topic, how much of this is like a real issue and how much of it is just like a perceived one for homeowners, right? It's like, oh, well, what if I ever need to, versus like, no, it's actually like, it's not actually a problem. Oh, and I'm Ben, by the way, from Quick Carbon. Thanks for everything so far.
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends geographically. In the Northeast, it's much more perceived rather than a real issue. In the Northeast, I live in the Northeast. Our sort of grid peak events tend to not coincide with outages, right? The peaks tend to come the hottest weekday afternoon in the summertime, and our outages are usually storm events, wintertime or tropical storms, and so they really don't overlap. In Puerto Rico, there's a very significant overlap for non-storm related outages, and so that's a more nuanced conversation there. And then in California, kind of the same thing, where PSPS events are obviously pulling energy from the batteries to avoid PSPS events in many cases. So there's also a tension there as well.
Interesting, thank you.
Speaking along the lines of data, backing up what people are saying, I listened not too long ago to this episode of the Energy Transition Show, where Christopher Clack was talking about the idea of local solar being cheaper than utility scale solar, with the idea that once you take into account a lot more factors about local solar, such as, putting to work rooftop area that would be otherwise underutilized, so maybe there's a cheaper cost there, less transmission infrastructure being needed, less, waste as a result of having the distribution be more local, that it netted out to local solar being, comparable, if not lower cost to utility scale solar. You've got a lot of data. Has any of it lended itself to that theory, or any thoughts?
Yeah, Chris Clack does really good work, and obviously directionally that's intuitively true, especially when you consider that sort of ipso facto of it being on your roof, there is no NIMBY problem, right? It's like a YIMBY thing, or yes on my roof, a Yammer ethos. Like, people want it, right? And even if rooftop solar is one of the highest publicly supported clean energy solutions, there are no siting issues. So even when you talk about the cost of utility scale solar versus distributed solar, that might be for projects that get built, right? But what about all of the projects that never got built because they got stuck in an interconnection queue, or siting issues, or there was a dispute with adjacent landowners, or the transmission line couldn't be built? There are tons and tons of dead transmission projects throughout the country. So yeah, and then Saul Griffith from Rewire America has done really, really great modeling on this as well, and has basically calculated that if we electrified the entire economy, our total electricity demand would only double, because electric machines are more efficient than combustion-based machines, so it would double. But we could satisfy that half of that doubled demand with solar on the built environment, on rooftops and carports. And so it's like, yeah, we can argue about this all we want, but today Sunrun probably put up, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of rooftop solar systems, while utility scale, is arguing about siting or whatever. So, and we need utility scale. We need all solutions, but fundamentally we should make use of our existing built infrastructure, and not sort of prioritize greenfield development because we erroneously think it's cheaper.
Is the installation costs significantly better, like economically, for utility, just because they're putting it all in one place, piping it into one inverter?
Yeah, it's an apples to oranges comparison, because you're not necessarily including the transmission and distribution costs and all the legal costs and all of that stuff. On a per watt basis, installed cost basis, it will look cheaper. Utility scale will look cheaper generally, but it's a false comparison.
Just getting to that point is so much more expensive, essentially. Yeah. Got it. And
then getting that power to the homes.
Okay, thanks.
No one else has a question.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Chris, I think you mentioned thermostats in the beginning of your talk, or maybe I'm confused. Do you control users' thermostats in any way?
Sunrun doesn't. We do, in some cases, give out Nest thermostats as a part of promotions for VPP programs. We may control them in the future, but because our primary business is solar and batteries, the amount of resource available to you from a battery, from a Tesla Powerwall, let's say, is 5 kilowatts over a few hours, right? Consistent. And what do you get out of a thermostat when you turn it down a degree or two? Not a whole lot, right? And so we mainly focus on those really big resources.
What about the problem that everybody comes home at, let's say, 6, 7, and they want to charge their car, Are you thinking about, just not charging in that time and charging at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock? So it's not bringing energy, but it's not using energy at peak times.
Yeah, I actually think that's something that many utilities have done pretty well, is put in place managed charging programs to delay charging until the peak time is over. Most of the utilities that I work with around the country may not have time of use programs, and certainly do not have, or rates, and certainly do not have default time of use, but most of them have managed charging programs. So that's something that's becoming ubiquitous.
Thank you.
Can I ask you about the economics of NEM3 with respect to VPPs? And like the whole thing is like you're supposed to self-consume, and like, so do you have anything left to participate in those programs?
Yeah, yeah, it complicates things, and NEM3, and we call it NBT, the net billing tariff, because it's fundamentally not net metering anymore. Yeah, it complicates things, and sometimes the sort of grid service need is in conflict with the NBT. But fundamentally, it's all about the battery capacity and how to maximize that for customer and aggregator value. And that's where our partner Lunar really comes in, looking at a site level. Should we maximize this site for the net billing tariff or for the grid service program that it's enrolled in?
Makes sense. Do we have other questions? Maybe one more.
If nobody wants, I'll take the last one, but only if nobody wants. All right, so one last tricky one. You talked about the fact that you don't see any technological barriers, and we've been thinking that those smart metering are big issues and it's something to wait for. So what would be the added value of smart meters for homeowners regarding future energy usability as you see it, if it's not for VPPs?
Putting meter readers out of work, I guess. I've had a smart. I live in Maine, and during the Great Recession, the ARA bill passed Congress and funded a bunch of sort of infrastructure projects, including smart meter deployment. My state, was that a decade ago now? Yeah, I guess it was maybe a little bit more than a decade ago. Maine at one point had the highest penetration of smart meters of anywhere in the country. Every customer in Central Maine Power Territory, except for a couple that opted out because they thought they were going to get cancer from the frequency, every customer has had smart meters for over a decade. I don't even have access to my data in anything except for like 1 month lag. And it literally does nothing that I'm aware of besides put meter readers out of work. So obviously I'm being flippant because there are use cases, and there will be use cases. I think sort of like what we think about as smart meters is not really the way to go, but there are companies like Utilidata and others that have smart grid chips embedded in meter collars that could also be embedded directly in meters that could do all sorts of things like weather prediction, home consumption prediction, that could talk to DERs, that could let the utility operators know where a line went down, right, with greater specificity, and automatically dispatch line crews to go repair that. So I think there's lots of things that could be done with sort of future grid edge technologies, but I think chasing just kind of like digital meters is not really where it's at.
Thanks.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much. This was really informative. Yeah, thank you. I hope everybody has a great day, and see you soon on Slack, I guess.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Nice spending time with you.
See y'all.
Enjoy your day and your evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.